Now it's time for all things mental health with your host, Dr. Nicholas Goodwin. Come on in, take a seat. All are welcome here. It's Health Cafe Radio.
It's been a while, so how the hell have you been?
Welcome. This is Nicholas Goodwin, Health Cafe Radio. Hanging out with my buddy Aaron Tilbury.
Hello.
What's up? He's producing
Saturday
stuff.
to you.
Happy Saturday, 6:05 p.m. Coming with you live. Just kidding. It's pre-recorded. It's good to be back. It's good to see all of your pretty faces. KSBN, 12:30 a.m. Today I have kind of a surprise. It's not really surprise isn't the right word, but I got something for Aaron, and he's gonna watch a music video that, and then we're gonna kind of react to it. And this is not super timely because this album secretly dropped a couple of weeks ago, and it's Eminem's new album. Have you heard about that at all, Aaron? Have you a huge Eminem fan? I think it dropped by surprise 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he did that with his last two albums, and I think it's because he gets a lot of criticism with his announcements, and so if he just drops the album that day, kind of like Beyonce did, then he doesn't have the same criticism. I promise you this topic is about mental health. I could probably talk about rap music, but I will definitely make this about mental health because there's a track on the album which is called Darkness, which is about the Las Vegas shooting that happened a couple of years ago at I don't remember the country singer's name, but it was at a country concert, and it was absolutely devastating because the shooter was in a hotel room and he was shooting openly at the crowd, and so it was kind of a first of its kind. There had been mass shootings, before, and so it was absolutely terrifying. And Eminem takes this first-person perspective through the shooter in this song that he does, and then the music video accompanies it. And so what I want to do is I want to pause the recording here in a second. If you're listening to this on my website, pause yours too, and you can watch it if you haven't already. If you're listening on the radio show, maybe after the show is over, you can go watch it if you haven't already watched it. But me and Aaron are going to watch it, and then we're going to kind of respond to it. So Aaron, if you don't mind, pausing the track for me.
Let's do it.
All right, welcome back, Health Cafe Radio. We just finished watching the music video to Eminem's Darkness about the Las Vegas shooting. Aaron watched it with me. What are your thoughts, Aaron? What are your first kind of reactions to that?
My first reactions?
Yeah.
Jeez. Well, I think that's a tough one. I think the video, the music video, the song, is examining a couple different things.
Yeah.
I think mental illness, obviously the idea of gun violence. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, man, I've got a lot of different thoughts about it. I don't know that I necessarily have like one solid first impression.
Right on. I think that the video definitely, I've heard it a couple times, and I'm wondering if he's really trying to address that common argument that people make for this mental illness versus gun violence thing. And it's not necessarily like, where I really see me wanting to talk about, but it's worth bringing up initially because I think that I hear Eminem's stance, but I also really appreciate the conversation happening because usually when you hear these arguments and this conversation, it's right after one of these events has happened. Mm-hmm. So there's incredible amounts of fear. And so people tend to be really polarized when they're scared. And so for him to come with this record, this song here, where we're able to maybe hopefully people can bring the conversation up again, where we're not super fresh out of something similar, and maybe have another and continue the conversation because these potentially can continue to happen, and I think we want to as a society understand them more.
Yeah, I think the tough thing for me is that I see such a disparity between if we're talking about you and I sitting in the living room and just talking over across the coffee table from one another about gun violence and mental illness, that conversation, I think it needs to happen. I think those conversations are healthy, but the people that are involved in making change, the people that are really beating the drums, the crowds, the the political factions, whether it's Republican, Democrat, NRA, whatever those groups are, they don't want to be understanding of one another. They don't have a goal. Like if we're being really honest, right? They don't have any goal whatsoever to give the other side space to exist.
No, I totally hear that.
So it's kind of
They even pull sometimes the opposite. Like, here, this event just happened. Now we need to push these laws for our own agenda.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I guess my thing with that is that then what it does is it diminishes the ability for those coffee table exchanges for them to have any kind of impact in the society that you're talking about.
Right.
I mean, I got tons of thoughts about the mental illness issue and tons of thoughts about the gun violence issue. And, one of the things I guess that stood out to me is at the end of that video, as the screens are showing different pieces of propaganda from all sorts of different sides. Yeah. I love it. Everything is a side. We just don't even have a better word for it. But different views, different propaganda from different views. And each one of those screens is replaced by a portion of the American flag. And then pretty soon, right, you see all these TVs stacked in the shape of the United States with the flag, right? And then the final statement is, when will this end, right? Yeah. In reference to the gun violence and all the propaganda and all that kind of stuff. But I got something, I felt like, unintended or not, that the big question that you're left with is, when will this end? And you're looking at the United States. Oh. You're looking at the flag. You're looking at the country. The propaganda at that point. So I realized that the question was kind of in reference to, like, when will this be enough? When will this end? When will we? And I just think it's a very good question. And I think the question should also be asked about, when will this end in terms of the country in its entirety. Gotcha. When what's the word? The political, the people's selfish motives preventing things like these issues being solved, when will that end, kind of a thing? Yeah, man. Like, obviously you've helped and been a huge part of nonprofit, right? That I work with, or that I was working with, and was a director of for a while. So for some people may not know, but the Joyner Project, and you're an integral member of that team. There has been, and I won't spend a ton of time on this, but this is something I can offer from personal experience. Right. That when you see something that's going a certain way and there's a certain heart behind it, when this country was started, right? Yeah. There's a certain heart behind it. When that changes, when the people that have been given power or a place at the table, or that are in charge, maybe even, right? When those are new people and different people, and they have completely different idea about what things should look like and a completely different design for the country, there's inevitability. Definitely. And I think that the reason I bring that up is I think, again, back to whether you're talking about the mental health or the gun violence issue, when you're talking about the factions that are running stuff on a major level, I don't think that they have the same desire, the same goal for our country, even the same vision of what our country is supposed to look like, that we did when we founded it. Sure. I'm not, by the way, that might sound like I'm making a value judgment. Right. And maybe people that know me might know where I fall on that, but I'm saying that absence of any value judgment. I'm just saying, like, there's going to be a change, positive or negative. Sure. There's going to be a change. Right on. And I think in order to make change, you kind of where I'm feeling led is like, okay, what can I do then as well, right? Because you can have the coffee tables, many coffee table conversations you can want about it. You can even broadcast this on AM radio and see what makes a difference, right? Right. But talking and I'm like, well, what can I think and do? And if even if it's not an action, how can I try to understand what's happening here, right? And I think if enough experts come and say, look, we've identified the psychological phenomenon behind mass shooter suicides, which is really what this was, and this is what we think should happen. Even though it's bureaucratic, changes can happen. Usually in order to make changes happen, you have to appeal to certain people's needs, and there's so much that we can go in there. But personally, I want to try to understand the psychology, and I'm definitely not going to try to make a political argument against gun control, right, gun laws at all. But I want to acknowledge that conversation, and then
even if we're saying no, these shootings aren't mental health issues, which I'll make a case for just briefly. There's definitely psychology there. So understanding the psychology behind it, right? And I think that, and I've seen this on Facebook with my friends, and it's interesting how divisive it is as far as like, it's absolutely gun, it's absolutely mental illness, right? People who say it's all gun, mass shootings are not mental illness at all. It confuses me a little bit. It's got to be some mental illness, right? But the truth is, for me, it's like to blame these things on one socioeconomic issue is crass, right? There's no way it's one thing, right? There's not one thing. But I mean, if you looked at the statistics, if we're just looking at maybe the statistics of suicide, right? 50% of people who commit suicide have a mental illness. When they did what they call psychological, what do they call them? Psychological, just evaluations, post-mortem. They have a word for it. I forgot what it's called. They probably identified probably closer to 90% of people who commit suicide had a mental illness. For me, it's like, wait, isn't suicide a mental illness, right, itself? But it's not in, like, the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual. So technically, no, not really. And I can think of reasons maybe why it isn't a result of mental illness, and that's like 10%, right? So maybe 10% of the suicides fit in this box of mass shooter suicides. Probably, I don't think so. I think there is mental illness there. But, this individual was treated with benzodiazepines and not, like mood disorder stuff.
I'm not, obviously, I don't have a PhD like you do.
Right.
Okay. But, the last, I guess, my last kind of point on in terms of this is, I don't care whether someone's been diagnosed as being mentally ill or not.
Right.
When you're talking about somebody's worldview being that twisted and warped, there is something wrong.
There's something wrong.
So whether it has the exact definition of mental illness, well, that then is just people that have more schooling than me that have been the ones to define mental illness. Fine, more power to them.
It's a technicality thing at some point.
Sure, but you would not like. Okay, so a dog that has rabies, right? Say they avoid water. And it's one of the reasons maybe they die from dehydration, okay? Is because the dog has rabies, it avoids water. And if I had a dog that didn't have rabies, but it was avoiding water, I might not have a diagnosis for it, Nick. But there's something fundamentally wrong with the mental biology of that creature that would lead it to right? And so that's what I'm talking about is we've got to, and part of this I just think comes from compassion, is we've got to be able to have compassion for people even if we can't name what they've got.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, there's
no. I'm so appreciate you said that. And I think the kickback is don't put this on mentally ill people. Don't say this is your fault, right? Because the majority of mentally ill people are not doing this, right? The majority of it's kind of if the argument goes anywhere, it's like it's not. If we just got rid of all the mentally ill, that's a terrible thought, right? It's not their fault. I think that's where that comes from. But
sure, okay. So I grew up with the generation where AIDS became prevalent and was discovered. I don't know if prevalent's the right word, but the epidemic. Right? Came from, I'm a little bit older than you, but it came when I was a kid. I can remember people, for example, that was like, hey, this person's gay. Can't shake their hand because you could get AIDS, right? Right. We're seeing this with the coronavirus now. We're hearing about Chinese students in universities across the world that sit in class and no one in class wants to sit next to them because they think they're going to get the coronavirus. Okay, so this is the way human beings operate.
Definitely.
So I totally get that some people might have this idea of now I have not heard that argument.
Sure.
That really, if we end mental illness, we'll end gun violence. But here's my thing, and so I don't know if this puts me in agreement with you. It probably does on some level. My thing is, no, we cannot say and ostracize mentally ill people that they're all going to turn into gun violent murderers.
No, we can't at all.
But the idea that those, to your point, that those that did commit and perpetrate these things, are we saying that the people that committed heinous acts of violence, mass shootings, that they were mentally stable?
Right.
Is that what we're saying? I need someone to tell me that then. If no, they're not mentally ill, that's not the issue. Then you're telling me that everything was okay upstairs. All the lights were on. BS.
Yeah, BS. And it comes in and we're sort of arguing the same thing. Did they have rabies? Did they not have rabies? But let's go in there and let's say what's the mechanism that's causing them not to want to drink. you know, he may not have a diagnosed mental illness, so let's examine the psychology and the patterns with the information that we do have, and see, even if we're not 100% right, even if we're 10% right, maybe we can learn something to prevent the next one.
Well, I think what we're going to find out if we were to ever do that, let's say that because I think, you know, you're a person that that would be willing to lead this movement. Let's say that you got resourced and you got a grant and you're, you know, whatever, and you're going to start diving in this and you were going to devote your life to this study. My belief, now some of this is obviously coming from my belief, my faith and other things. My belief is that when you dive in deep enough, what you'd find is diagnoses of, you know, per the video we just watched, loneliness.
Yeah, it is.
And marginalization.
Definitely.
And poverty.
Okay.
And cycles of abuse. See,
here it is.
What we want to do is we want to deal with it once it rears its ugly head and all comes together in a diagnosis.
Now we can do something.
Now we can do something. And I deal with this all the time, right? Okay, we have a girl who now is in jail because she got shoplifting to support her drug habit.
Right.
So now we can deal with this because she's a criminal. So society has something. We have a jail and we have a court system and we have a rehab, whatever.
Wow.
What we don't want to do is actually pitch in and show up and, you know, volunteer our time to come. We'll pay our taxes, but we don't want to volunteer our time to come down to a school and mentor a child who has nobody positive in their life before crap starts happening to them, right? These trafficking victims you and I have dealt with, there was all a before, and nobody cared about them before. And now that there's a post-trauma, you know, we're scratching and clawing to get some people to care about them, and some people do. But what about the before? And so that's what I feel that we would dive into and find is a bunch of stuff that we, you know, I can't diagnose if there's a problem with this kid, but there's going to be a problem, right? Dad's gone or mom's gone and they're lonely, and older brother's a gang member and they live in poverty, and there's not a lot of programs at their school. In fact, they just cut the art and science program at the school because there's not a, right? This is what reality looks like for so many kids. So to me, it's like the mental illness is an inevitability.
That's real. That's real, man.
It's,
That's good. As you said, and I want to try to get into that. I want to talk about some because when I was reading this book and I talk about Thomas Joyner is a suicidologist. I don't know if that's what he is or not, but he wrote books on suicide. And there's a book that I was reading. I was about halfway through, and it's a book on murder-suicide. And this song made me finish that book. It was a long book. And so I'll talk a little bit about what his opinions are on it. And I definitely can relate to and it kind of makes sense. And if you look at this specific case, some of the things, because he wrote it before this happened, sort of line up with his theory. But I want to talk a little bit about this idea of compassion, which I think is very interesting. And thinking about, okay, so this song is written through the first-person perspective of the shooter, Stephen Paddock, something like that. I looked it up and then I forgot it. And that's an interesting thing to do. And I don't think Eminem has gotten really any kickback. I think he's sort of, people have sort of acknowledged that what he did was good. And it's Stephen Paddock. But and I have this sort of thought, like, sometimes, you know, a lot of the mass shootings likely were done for the perpetrator to feel a sense of glory, right? And you see kind of a contagiousness to it. That's why a lot of times you'll see a shooting and then there'll be another violent event, sometimes a little bit different, but somebody sort of, and that's similar with suicide as well. But what are your thoughts on maybe like, okay, well, if Stephen Paddock did this for glory and now the next person says, wow, Eminem wrote a song about it, right? Are we concerned that that might be a dangerous thing?
Oh, in other words, that we are sensationalizing too much?
Too much.
Here, you know, it's funny. Again, I've got some years on you. When I was a little kid, that argument used to come up all the time when rap music really first hit the scene.
Right.
The argument was, are we sensationalizing violence? Are we sensationalizing the stuff against women versus whatever? And then, of course, the artists would say, we're not sensationalizing it. We're telling you what's already going on.
Definitely.
What I would say is, and I also think times have changed. There wasn't an internet when I was a little kid, for example. I didn't even know about this Eminem video until you showed it to me. Now I have a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old. I actually have an adopted 20-year-old in my home, too. I work with young people. I mean, I'm around them a couple times a week. And I volunteer at a local high school. Haven't heard a single person talk about this until you, Nick Goodwin, of the PhD, brought this in to talk about it in a professional way. So I think people could make the argument. My perspective would be, didn't even know this existed until a doctor started talking to me about it. So the idea of this being so sensationalized that it would cause drama, I don't buy it.
Yeah. And they said the same thing about Joker 2 and that kid. They didn't say, I haven't heard anybody say this about this. It's just something that I thought about.
Yeah.
They just didn't think with Joker, and it was unsubstantiated like
yeah.
stuff. And we know that if somebody does something like this and they handle it wrong in the news, and in suicide we've learned, and we've done it right mostly, but in mass shootings we haven't learned, and it's been probably done, it's probably getting better, but especially initially it was not done well. That's why you saw them kind of have a ripple effect. We know that immediately after it's very dangerous to report it in a certain way because other people might do it, right? It sort of allows them to. We don't know that with so much time. We didn't release it fresh, right? So there's no reason to think that it would, other than you're just sort of supposing. And this is something that I also say about Eminem music for me personally. I have been able to process so much stuff through his music, right? And he's gone back and he's said some of his songs he really wishes he didn't do, right? But I started listening to it when I was 11, and that was a very difficult time for me. And I can't relate to a lot of his stuff, but I can relate to a lot of his stuff. And so I felt like I was able to process and heal a lot, maybe through his processing and healing, because he did that over his. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what media is for to an extent. I feel like that's what music is for. It's for us to process the terrible things that happen to us.
Yeah, man. I think the problem is that everybody's hurting, and so then we want to bash Eminem.
Yeah.
He's going to exacerbate, he's going to sensationalize. Look, here's the deal.
Yeah.
Y'all ain't talking about it. Y'all ain't doing anything about it.
Right.
He's bringing up the conversation.
Yeah.
If our expectation is that these artists would actually bring solutions, well, then we're putting our hope in the wrong place.
Put our hope in the wrong place. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, come on. Like, that's their job, is exactly what their job is to sensationalize things.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of so that people are talking about it.
Yeah, bring it up.
And if people want to, and they already have been, but it's just a new person to bash. And if in this case, and I haven't heard it, like you said, I did see a little bit about the Joker, and maybe Eminem's getting bashed, and I haven't heard that.
I haven't heard it either.
You know what? I hear the same thing about Fox News and CNN.
Yeah.
Everybody dramatizes what they want to dramatize.
Yeah.
Because what I think right now is there is so much tragedy.
Yeah.
Like, you find me a human being who hasn't been touched by suicide or cancer.
Right. Yeah.
There is so much tragedy, or poverty or mental illness. There is so much tragedy in this world that we're overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
Our emotions aren't really even able to handle the amount of tragedy. There's tragedy that doesn't even affect us that we deal with on a daily basis because we're told we need to care.
Definitely.
And so for me, I just think the human being is in a tough spot. We have tons of stuff that we absolutely don't have any clue how to deal with it dumped in our lap. And it would be kind of like if when my kids were little, like kindergarten, I started talking to them about me and their mom's marital problems.
That's a great example.
Like, sure, it has something to do with them, but the idea that they can carry that, that they should have to sift through that they should actually even have to carry the burden of knowing that even exists, is horrific. It's horrible. Parents that do that to their kids shouldn't be parents, man. Like, and that's the problem, is that it doesn't matter what side we're on. We're so interested in convincing the other person to get them to care about what we care about. And we're so uninterested in caring about what they're already going through that we're just blasting tragedy on every channel, in every movie, in every discourse. And it's too much.
It's too much, man. What you just said to me just gave me chills, man. That's so good. What you just said. That's so good. It's so true. We are not emotionally capable to handle this much trauma, even if it's not our own.
Right, not at all, dude. Like, every single one of us on this planet is like a walking case of compassion fatigue and burnout, and we don't even know it.
Yeah.
It's
almost in honor of that, I should almost say, and so that's why we're not. But I'll still continue. If you feel that way, please, if this is exhausting, turn the show off. But I so agree with you. It's so fabulous what you say, and it's so true. It's so true. It's kind of switching gears a little bit and saying, I totally agree with you, but let's continue. Put this information in, and it's from the perspective of wanting to understand this. And I think, here's the deal. I think some of us are meant to deal with this and some of us aren't. Yeah. And I feel really called to this to an extent because I work with a lot of kiddos who might have homicidal ideation.
Yeah.
What a terrifying concept.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a burden that I've elected to and am emotionally able to deal with. If I had a kiddo myself who had homicidal ideation, I could not work with this population professionally. I've already put all my energy into that kiddo for that reason. But because I don't, I can right now with other kiddos and other people.
It's really good, man. It's really good, and I think it's just for people should really hear you say that and listen to the show again if they need to hear you say that, because there's no shame,
right,
and should be no guilt in being able to look at a situation and say, I don't have the emotional capacity to serve that.
Definitely.
We've talked about this before. You can play hurt sometimes. You got to suck it up and play hurt for the team.
Yeah.
But if you're playing injured, or you go out there in the field without the playbook, you're going to do damage, and to yourself and to others. And so we've got to eradicate. And I know you and I are both as Jesus followers. That's something we've talked about in terms of our faith. We've got to eradicate the shame and the guilt game. Not everybody is cut out for everything.
Exactly.
And so if now is your time to rest, or maybe now is your time to gear up for the fight or whatever, it's not that moment for you to be in the fight. Do you, and be healthy so that like you're able to serve people in a healthy way. But if someone else is not able to do that and they force themselves, it's no good for everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, and through this, what I appreciate about this song, and then we're going to go for a break, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the psychology that I think is going on here. Is Eminem taking the first-person perspective is sort of the definition of what empathy is, right? We're trying to take the perspective, we're trying to understand what the person's going through, and empathy is not acknowledging what the person has done that is reasonable, right? You're not saying that I understand why he did it, I would have done it if I was in his shoes. That's not what he's doing. When you're using empathy, you're trying to investigate the details, and you're trying to use your imagination to understand what the person's gone through. Sometimes you have personal experience that's similar. Usually, a lot of times you don't, and so you're just trying to see. And Eminem makes a lot of guesses here, some of them a little bit more political, like he talks about, like, I don't have a mental illness, and there's no reason why I'm doing this, and I just have access to a lot of guns. So there's some political agenda here with him, but he really tries to, and I think he uses some of his own experience to try to make it, try to put perspective to it, and that's really how we gain understanding, and that's how we understand the psychology, is trying to, for those of us who are wanting to and able to and wanting to understand this, put ourselves in that perspective, not by saying, because I want to be reasonable, I want to justify the action, but truly just so I can understand it.
Dude, I think that is the absolute key.
Yeah.
Because we've been kind of, and we've maybe been even skirting around this a little bit, not intentionally, but I think we both kind of said this in different ways. It's the process of going crazy.
Definitely.
When people are talking, and by the way, when I say going crazy, I should, let me just back up for a second. I don't mean to disparage anybody who's dealing with mental illness.
Let's change our language a little bit.
Well, right, I'm using that term because that's a term the world uses.
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
You and I certainly don't look at it as crazy or not crazy. Like people are. That's not the human experience. Okay. But what I guess what I mean is that the reason people don't want to go and try to empathize, right? The reason someone would maybe watch that video and not be brave enough to do what Eminem did by trying to empathize where this person's at is because they think it's crazy. And so I'm not. So that's why I'm using that word. It's totally a negative connotation.
But I understand
word.
what you did there. That makes sense.
And so so they think like if Nick is going through something and I try to put myself where he's at, that's impossible because he's mentally ill or he's crazy and I'm not crazy. And so how could I possibly empathize? And what I guess I'm trying to get at is there's a process of people, even mental illness. There can be, and I'm not saying that it can't happen due to a traumatic circumstance like where immediately it onsets, but there's also the idea of over time. And the reason I'm bringing up the process is we don't address this stuff when it's able to be addressed.
Yes.
And then we want to cast aspersions, and that's again why I use that word, which I won't use again, but the C word, right?
Right.
Is people want to use that word because it enables them to write other human beings off. Yes. Instead of saying, no, this is something we could still deal with, or we could have dealt with had somebody been brave enough to address it. And to me, that's where the compassion comes in. And I know that you're going to speak about compassion in the next segment. Yeah. But to me, that's where we move from human beings that are sympathetic to circumstance, to being
I feel
empathetic.
sorry for you, to empathy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm with you on that.
That's good. That's heavy. I'm glad. That's perfect. That's perfect. So I'm going to use that to close this out. We're going to go ahead and lean into a break. When we come back, we'll kind of dive into the psychology a little bit here, and I'll kind of give my opinions on that.
Are you for freedom? Then get to know the Jonah Project in Spokane, Washington. You can find out more about them at jonahproject.org. That's JONAH project.org. Their team of advocates is working in churches, schools, and alongside families to advocate for at-risk youth and trafficking survivors right now. That's right, survivors of human trafficking now have a place for rest, relocation, and healing here in the Spokane area at a safe home called Lighthouse.
All right, we're back. Health Cafe Radio, KSBN, 1230 a.m. Nicholas Goodwin here, there in Tilbury. Continuing off with our conversation, in the previous segment, we were talking about the music video "Darkness" by Eminem, and we're talking, which is kind of a first-person account of the Las Vegas shooter that occurred several years ago in Las Vegas. In this segment, I want us to kind of talk about this idea, this phenomenon of murder-suicide, which, in my opinion, is what probably is the best psychological phenomenon that can discuss this issue. As we learn more and more, there may be a better word for it, but this probably fits underneath the murder-suicide umbrella the best. And the sources that I'm going to use for this is by Thomas Joyner, and I used a lot of this stuff when we did the 3 episodes on suicide. And he did a book about murder-suicide called The Perversion of Virtue, right, where he discusses 4 virtues that he feels are at the center, at least one at the center of every murder-suicide that occurs. And it's by Thomas Joyner, called The Perversion of Virtue, and I would recommend it if this is something you are interested in. That's what to people who are interested in developing this more, I would recommend it. It took me a long time to read. It was not an easy read, probably because of the subject matter more or less, but this music video helped me finish it, and it was fabulous information. And so the idea of murder-suicide, in Thomas Joyner's opinion, which, because I do not have a lot of personal experience with people who've perpetrated murder-suicide, I don't necessarily have a professional way to side with him, though I definitely have one with people who are suicidal, and I feel like he's very accurate there. And so I trust his professional opinion, and I haven't heard anything that really rivals it. The idea of murder-suicide, in his opinion, is that it is actually a suicide, right, where the person made the decision that their life can no longer exist, that they've made a suicidal decision, like we talked about last time. Suicidal decisions are not impulsive, right? They made the decision usually after a long time of really, really, really thinking about it, and they get to this very, very narrow, this tunnel vision perspective that there's no other options, that their life is going to end by suicide. And that's kind of the psychological place these individuals will get to when we're talking specifically about suicide completions, right? When people who've actually died by suicide, and when we're talking about people who've died by suicide after perpetrating murder-suicide. Okay, so if you think about this perspective with in this situation or any situation where there's murder-suicide, they've come to the conclusion that they're going to commit suicide, and a lot of times, and for a lot of people, that it comes from a basis of the 3 biggest risk factors as review, and Aaron talked about this before. What we're likely to see if we were to really examine this person, we would see isolation. Well, that's exactly what we see, right? We see incredible isolation, and not only isolation, we feel the inability to belong, right? We also feel that their life is a burden to others, okay? That people's lives will benefit from them dying, which is not true, right? It's an absolutely wrong misconception. People's lives are devastated by suicide, but the person who is suicidal believes that to be true, okay? And then the last thing is the capability of actually committing the act, which is very hard to do. It takes a lot of focus and concentration, which a lot of times is why we see people do it are actually sober, which is an interesting misconception in this music video by Darkness by Eminem. He talks about, the lyrics in the video talk about the perpetrator's alcohol addiction and benzodiazepine use. But they did a blood drug screen on him, and it was absent in his blood, but it was present in his urine, which indicated recent use, like in the past, but not immediate use. So Stephen Paddock was sober when he committed the acts, where in Eminem's perspective he was not. And I think that comes again from trying to reach that empathy and trying to understand why someone would do this. Well, they must not have been sober.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thing would be, and I'm not trying to. I mean, Eminem's not a doctor, so I'm not trying to apologize. And who knows what he knows and all that.
Yeah.
My question would be whether there was, whether he was sober or not. Is it possible that those things, over heavy use over time, alter our brain chemistry to the point where we might be physically sober, but our outlook is still messed up, like permanently messed up?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you see a lot of suicide decedents, and I don't know enough about the other mass killers.
I grew up with kind of the crack epidemic, and I've seen people come off of that. But
there's permanent consequences.
There's permanent. I know. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see that chemistry, to see like once we get to know that more specifically. But in his case, that was the case. He had chronic alcohol abuse, and you saw deterioration in his life and quality of life, right? Due to that, and probably due to his gambling as well. And he used benzodiazepines. I don't know if we knew that he used it illicitly. He filled a couple prescriptions, and so it's hard to say that it may have been medicinally indicated. He may have had anxiety, right? Because those medications can be prescribed for anxiety. But that's why it takes so much focus. That third thing, where the ability to commit, or that fearlessness, takes a lot of time. And another thing that's consistent with it is this guy actually booked hotels. Stephen Paddock booked hotels in like Chicago and other areas that had big concerts, and he just didn't go. But he had taken a step to do this before, which shows that he had been thinking about this for a long time. The fact that he had such a huge arsenal of guns, right? Not that everyone has an arsenal of guns. I'm trying to say they're doing that, but I would probably argue that arsenal of guns motivation came from something like this, rather than him being a collector or a hunter, or et cetera. That wasn't consistent with his life, right? So you need to have this focus is essential. So it's not an impulsive decision. It's usually a sober one, which is consistent with this. And so when somebody commits murder-suicide, then there's an extra step there for people who commit murder-suicide. They think, I am going to die, but because I'm going to die, something has to happen due to a value. And there's 4 values. There's mercy, there's duty, there's justice, and there's glory, right? These values are considered to be positive things, which is why the book is called The Perversion of Virtue, right? The fact that these virtues are right by definition, but the perpetrators are very, very mistaken. I'll give an example, and these examples are hard to hear, so give a preference. These are hard to hear examples. An example of mercy is a young couple, and I don't remember their name. In the book, we'll give you the examples where they went into extreme financial hardship. And so they decided together that they would end their lives. But they had children. And because they had children, they said, well, if we ended our lives, which we were going to do, right, we had that tunnel vision, their lives would be much worse. So it would be merciful for us, and they didn't say this quote-wise, but this is kind of trying to understand the perspective. It would be merciful for us to take our children's lives before we committed suicide. Does that make sense? So there was a murder-suicide, and it was through a perversion of the virtue mercy, right? That's an example of that. There's another example in the book where they use animals, and it's almost easier for me to understand the animals because I cannot fathom doing that with children. I cannot put myself in that perspective. But this is an example that might make us more able to understand this perspective. There was a person had put a sign on his barn door indicating, "Please do not enter. Please call the police and do not enter." Right? And it's an interesting perspective. It happens a lot. It doesn't happen a lot. It's happened several times where somebody puts a note on the door that says, "Do not enter, call the police," because they do not want to inflict pain on the person who has to see them die. And sometimes it's a misconception thinking that someone suicides and then they present it to sort of devastate people, which is not usually the case. Usually they don't want you to be hurt by it. And when they entered this barn, the person had killed half of his cows. He had hundreds of cows, and he killed half of them, and then he killed himself. But it was like, why did he kill half of his cows? Well, he killed the half of his cows that required bi-daily, or 2 times a day, milking. Okay? Because he was pretty much the only person who lived on a farm, the only person who worked on the farm. He knew that if he would have committed suicide, the cows that required twice a day milking would be in physical agony. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so he killed half of them, and the cows who only required intermittent milking, he kept them alive because they would probably have been okay. right? And so that kind of talks about the idea of mercy, and also the second value, which is duty, the idea that you don't want what your obligations are to have to go on to somebody else. You want to take care of your duty. And a lot of times this is manifested by somebody whose significant other is very, very sick. Maybe they have dementia or cancer. And so before they kill themselves, they kill their spouse because they don't want the duty of their spouse to be put on their other loved ones. And so their duty is so like I said, it's the right virtue, it's the correct definition, but it's absolutely perversion because that's definitely not the case. But in the tunnel vision focus of the psychology of this person, they are wanting to take care of their duty before they commit suicide. Justice is and mercy and duty are fairly common, probably the more common ones. And so justice and glory are when we're starting to talk a little bit more about mass shooters. Okay. And it's interesting, the Columbine shooters were initially thought to have been justice, that they had been bullied, right? And so that they were looking to then perpetrate violence against the jocks that were bullying them in an effort of justice. But the truth was they actually did fairly well socially and actually probably were bullies themselves. So that's not consistent. But they had idolized a bomber, and I don't remember his name, and they wanted to beat his death toll. And if Columbine's bombs, if the Columbine shooters, if their bombs had worked and not misfunctioned, they probably would have. But I didn't know that. I didn't realize they had bombs. And so definitely the image that was painted in the media was that they were bullied and that the issue was bullying and that we need to address bullying in order to prevent this, which was not the case for them. It was glory. They were looking at creating this event. They wanted to be in the papers, right? Eminem speaks to that. I wonder, if I bet you I would be in the papers, I wonder who would win, right? They wanted to be known forever for what they had done.
The narrative, that drum was beat so hard that I guarantee you, if you were to ask people, like I grew up, the Columbine thing, I watched the whole thing.
Remember vividly.
Right? I guarantee you, if you were to ask people, they would still say that the kids were bullied, and so that's why they did it.
That's what I thought. That was my understanding until I read
Which, by the way, I also think that some of that, I don't think we realize how many people in this country maybe that haven't been diagnosed or aren't going to go out and shoot anybody. They're just the average person, woman or man, working the job, doing the American dream thing or whatever, has felt bullied and has felt picked on. And so I honestly think that one of the reasons that those narratives are so intense and so strong and livid is because of transference. I think
it's because relatable.
Yes, I think we feel bullied and we feel like, you know what? I've wanted to do that before. I'll never go that far, but I've thought about it.
But I've thought about it, yeah. So maybe in a more innocent way, it's sort of us trying to empathize with the shooters, saying, well, if they were bullied, I wouldn't have done it, but I see that being a plausible series of events.
And I don't think that we're rationally going through that process. I think just our brain immediately, as a person who's been bullied, right, we immediately react to that must have been what had happened.
Yeah.
And I get it. The idea, right, of two people that haven't been bullied and nothing has happened to them, that still blows us away. It's the idea that someone can just that this type of tragedy could really be arbitrary.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we can't. Something that we cannot fathom or imagine.
It's too scary for us.
It's so scary, and that's what made this guy so scary. And there was this building narrative, interesting enough, against serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressants, because a lot of these people went into schools had been on them, right, or at least some point. And then there almost was like this investigation. Okay, the Las Vegas shooter must have been on these, and he had been offered them at one point, but he never took them. And so it's trying to understand what is causing this. And it's very hard to relate to the idea of glory. It's very hard to sort of put yourself in this perspective, which because this person really had no other indications of mercy or duty or justice, right? And I think Eminem sort of plays with the idea of justice in his song, just trying to understand because we can relate to that more. But the idea of glory that whatever he wanted to do, however maybe he felt insignificant and felt, well, I have to die because of society making me insignificant, but I won't be a dead insignificant person, right? Another interesting thing I think in this song, and this speaks to the psychology of...
It's kind of like if I can't be significant in life, I'll be significant in death.
Right, exactly. You will never forget who I am, kind of a thing. Yeah. And that's about as close as I can get to understanding it. I'm sure it's much deeper and darker than that, but that's about as close as I can get. Eminem talked about, I don't want to be alone in the darkness, which is the lyric, which I think is fascinating. And it speaks to the loneliness that people can experience who are suicidal, not necessarily that are going to commit suicide, but that loneliness becomes suicidality quickly. And so, I don't want to be alone in the darkness, maybe that he had committed these crimes because he didn't want to be alone in death. But, I mean, that might not be far off. I mean, it's just trying to understand where it's coming from. A couple other things that are kind of in his perspective of thinking of, okay, well, as a selfish person, well, he had I think it was a wife from the Philippines that he sent back to the Philippines, and he bought her a house there, right? He spent $100,000 on her house there. And so he's sort of, it's that idea that maybe his motivation wasn't the death toll. The motivation was his own death, right? That the suicide itself was for him the event, right? For him was the and then the mass shooting itself was because he had made that conclusion.
So, and I know people out there that love to play like Call of Duty and stuff will hate me saying this.
Okay.
I think that there is a massive amount, and I think some of this happens. I mean, man, this could go. I'm trying to think. Kind of not let the octopus out of the box.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think some of this stems down from the fact that like we feel uneasy now when we see a kid playing with toy guns.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, and because we feel like that leads to these instances. And I don't know if it's that or that we're cracking down on that. But I do think that social development plays into this.
Definitely. And
so this is the statement I'll make. I think that violent ideation is present in way more people than we want to believe.
Yeah.
I think that there are tons of people out there that dream of stuff like having a couple machine guns and just going off like. Dude, that game Grand Theft Auto is a good example of this.
Yeah.
People don't play that game and go through the missions.
Right. They just go with slaughter people.
They literally play that game so that they can get up and shoot, mug old ladies and blow people's heads off without repercussion.
Yeah.
We won't cross certain lines because we'd go to jail, because we'd be socially ostracized, and then what we care about mostly, ourselves, would be over.
Right.
But we think about it all the time. What is wrong with us, man? Seriously, dude, I'm not trying to be dramatic here. I just really, truly believe that there are a massive amount of people that maybe just haven't got to the point where they're not going to kill themselves and they don't want to go to prison. So they're never going to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
They think about it a lot.
They think about it. Well, here's an interesting...
Especially young males, man. At least the guys I'm coming across.
Well, sometimes as a guy, I get someone like, oh, I want that dude to come at me. You know what I mean? Let's see what happens. You know what I mean?
I'm going to take the fifth on that one, bro.
So, and I don't want to do it because I don't want, I think there's, I don't want to go to jail either, but I also have people that I really care about. And so I think that's a very common thought process. I think it is very common. And sometimes, but I also want to say a step further, the extreme violent ideation, I think it's also more common than we really want to acknowledge. And I think people are afraid to say it because it's sort of like, if I say it, I'm going to get labeled a person who could be this. I'm going to go to jail. I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't want to do this.
Well, who would you say that to? Would I, in between, moments of pillow talk, lean over to my wife and go, yesterday I got cut off on the freeway.
Yeah.
And the guy that cut me off, I really just think he needs his butt kicked.
Yeah.
And so I followed him.
Yeah.
And when he got out of his car at the McDonald's parking lot, I whooped his butt.
Yeah.
And I threw him in his own back seat, and then I drove home. I feel better about myself. What? I mean, if that really did happen, who would I share that with?
And then she'd slowly get up and just I'm just getting some water, honey.
I'm gonna go check on the kids. Why are you packing your suitcase, honey?
Oh, I was just freshening up.
Yeah. And I'm being super non-graphic with that and trying to use a very
AM radio language.
But you're totally right, man. Nobody wants to admit that stuff is swimming around their head, and I think half of us don't want to admit that stuff is swimming around our head to ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I have a little theory, and I don't know how much time it's worth to get into it, but the truth is we're a violent planet. I don't even want to say we're a violent species.
I know. I hate when people say America's a violent culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you been anywhere else in the world?
Have you watched the dinosaur movies? Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the first thing?
I know.
Like we're a violent planet.
Yeah. Rome was so peaceful.
Yeah. Rome was so peaceful, and we are a violent species, extremely so, almost up to about 150 years ago, or you know what I mean, where it slowed way down. And I think that, you know, now to sort of say, yeah, we can biologically evolve that quick, you know what I mean, where our ancestors of 150 years were having to, you know, kill people in self-defense on the reg, right, or kill people in just for land and food on the reg. 150 years later, those genes don't just evolve out, right? We're going to be very genetically similar. And so for some of us, it's not a big deal. For most of us, we're able to sort of maintain that, right? For a lot of us, we still have the thoughts. But for maybe for some of us, that it's, you know, maybe, you know, 150 years ago, that would have been, you know, you're going to have the capability of that. But for some of us, we couldn't, you know, we're not able to get rid of it. But I mean, I guess to make some arguments against violent inhumanity, like something like 80% of soldiers or something don't shoot to kill, right? They'll go into the field and they'll just sort of shoot not to kill, right? So, you know, most of us, I think, are not capable of this violence. But those of us who were, we needed them 150 years ago, and now we're saying, no, you can't be violent, no violence.
Well, and see, that's what I guess I mean is, man, I think that there is something in us that has to get worked out.
Yeah.
Because I think you're right. I think that we're not supposed to really be capable of that to one another.
Right.
And when certain things don't get worked out, or in the case of someone who's mentally ill or has been traumatized, addressed. But like, you know, when you hear about like the kiddo who like found his dad's gun and it was accidentally loaded and he accidentally shot his brother or sister with it or whatever, right? And it's a tragedy, and you know, we're upset for the parent for not securing that.
Yeah.
But also, you know, what's going on in that 7 or 10-year-old that made him pull the trigger? And I get we can go, whether 7 or 10. They want to see what's going to happen. They've been watching Bugs Bunny cartoons. They've seen things blow up, right? There's something that needs to be worked out in them. Yeah. And if it doesn't get addressed in a healthy way, I don't think it necessarily goes away.
Just go and
then now they're 40, and that's never been worked out in them.
Sure.
And they're going down collecting guns just because it makes them feel more manly. I don't, you know, I'm not saying everybody that collects guns, by the way, is that way. You know, but I just think that there's enough of that stuff that we don't want to talk about, we don't want to empathize with, to your point earlier.
Yeah.
So then we're not going to understand it.
We're just not going to be able to, right, until we just talk about it. So that's kind of what the motivation with me, I mean, coming from a perspective of like wanting to understand it. For those of us who maybe are able to kind of emphasize Aaron's point, this is not for all of our this is not a burden on all of us, but it is a society issue. And so now that it's a fresh time where something hasn't really happened and this video came out, we can kind of have this conversation. And I think there is power to conversation. And I think there's power to knowledge. And if we could try to understand and maybe as professionals start putting their opinion out more and more, so we can sort of help guide public opinion and saying, here's where the issues are, and as professionals, here's where we think we can kind of approach it. I think it's all valuable. And so I really appreciate Aaron's thoughts on it. I knew this was going to be a fabulous conversation with Aaron. This is why I was excited to do it. This is a good topic. Go ahead.
No, I was say I don't know how much I contributed to it, but it got me fired up.
Yeah, it got you fired up. And I can sit here and talk about. I can read the book to you guys if you want me to. All the information's in there. If you're more interested, go look into it. But I think we will not be able to end these issues if we do not try to understand one another. We have to understand what each other go through. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it. It doesn't mean I have to say, you know what, now that I really thought about it, yeah, I can really see myself up there. No, that's not what it is. But you do not know why he did it if you cannot try to use your own perspective, use your imagination, investigate the details, and try to put yourself there. And I really acknowledge Eminem doing that. I think that was a wonderful piece of work, and I hope it brings up the conversation in other areas other than just doctorates. But maybe that's it. But that's really the end of my show. Next week, we have a special guest, Erica Miley. She's going to be on. She's a good friend of mine, therapist from Florida. And so don't miss that show. It's on Saturday at 6:05 on 12:30 a.m. This is Nick Goodwin, Help Cafe Radio, signing out.